All right, guys, we are picking back up in our exercise of creating this sort of online storefront. That's our concept here. We're going to be doing a command line application where we have store owners and stores and customers, and the customers can have transactions and things like that. So it's been a little while here. We've been busy in our lives with other things, but we're going to try to keep going here in this wider example for us to get experience writing more complicated software systems and dealing with some of the things that goes along with that, or rather go along with that grammar there. So one of the things that we've done the last time was, let me see, things we still need to do to start. Yeah, so we were kind of documenting things that we have left here. So we have Crud Operations, the main program loop, login functionality, doing things from the perspective of store owners. That would be things to add to the main program loop, doing things from the perspective of customers, admin functions, kind of changing their password and that sort of thing, deleting their account. Store owners should be able to delete their store. And then doing a pass-through security check at a high level to kind of make sure that we're not exposing any information we wouldn't want to expose. So we shouldn't show data IDs in our database, or our sort of fake database here with the CSV files. We shouldn't show those to the user. No user should be able to see the information of other users. Only the store owner should be able to see the info about the store. That would be like the balance sheets and things. And also, we should probably encrypt passwords too. I mean, that's just a handful of general stuff. But we decided that the first thing that we were going to try to do was get Crud Operations for customers, and then make these example data files for all of the things that we're going to use. And I think we've kind of done that already. But one of the last videos that we'd done here, we had discussed kind of things to be done, kind of homework for you, things where having finished everything for one, then we would want to generalize it to all the rest of them. So over the last few times that we'd met, we had done some of these CRUD operations. CRUD is the acronym for create, read, update, and delete. These are very standard operations in data systems. Create lets you create a new record, read lets you see the record, update lets you change things on the record, and delete lets you delete it. Well, these are very common operations that you'll have in any system that lets you manage data. So we have done these things now for our CSV data store for customers. So we have a function that will read a customer record, right? This is easier. And if you remember, we modified this so that it didn't return ID. It just returned the name and how much money they had. We wrote an update method. We wrote a delete method, which is very similar to the update method, but rather than changing something about a row, it just excludes the row from the right. And then finally, we were working on the create method. This was the last thing that we were doing. Now, I do not believe we actually tested this. It's been a while here.
No, we didn't.
So
yeah,
we can go back through, read through it again, make sure that it makes sense. This is something that you'll face in real software development. Is you will write something and then either you'll have to get pulled onto another part of your project or a different problem or something, and then you'll have to come back and look at it. Having not completely finished everything, you have to go back and finish the partway done stuff. Happens a fair bit, actually, just because when you're in a real working environment, some things are higher priority than others. And if you have something's on fire in some part of your application, there's a bug, or the customer wants a really urgent feature or something, you may have to kind of put down what you were doing and go do something else and then come back to it. And so this is one of those reasons why it's good to actually comment your code and write self-documented code to begin with. I think I've talked about this a little bit. That means using good function names, using good variable names, kind of doing things in a quote unquote obvious way. There are certain, once we get to Lambda functions, maybe it'll make a little more sense. There's certain ways you can do things that might seem very clever, but if they're not obvious as to like what they're doing, it can kind of make it hard to pick up your code later. So for us here, I'm going to go back through and explain this one at a high level again. I would encourage you to go back and look at delete and update and read, because we spent enough time on these that I think you should probably be able to remember the high level of how they work in terms of opening the CSV file and saving things to the CSV file. But for this create one, just because this one's more complicated, right? Let's go through and have a look at it again. And then once we've tested this, I will want you to be doing all 4 of these operations for another one. And then we'll set up the main program loop. So we won't do all of these because what we'll try to do is actually make it general. So once you've done another one, I would say probably store owners would be a good one, because we already have customers. So once we have another example here, what we'll try to do is make all the functions general, so that we can use the read and the update and the delete, for example, for all of the fields rather than just one. So we talked about some ways, I believe, that we would have to do that. We'd have to be able to pass in the name of the file dynamically. We'd have to be able to pass in field names dynamically, right? Some other things as well. Okay, so we'll get to that later. But in the meantime, what we're going to try here is going back through this one, seeing if we can understand it and make sense of how it works, and then actually test to verify it. So we'll see exactly how much time we have this morning. We got to start a little bit later. So all right, so let's have a look at the code again. Like I said, I know it's been a while, but hopefully some of the things that we've done are still familiar enough that we won't have to spend too much time re-explaining. So if you remember, when we've been opening our CSV files using the CSV library, we have been, at least after we wrote the second function, we switched to using a dictionary reader for it, which is a function that is kind of in the CSV package here. And the dictionary reader and the dictionary writer let you deal with CSV files in terms of named columns here. And so first thing we're doing is we're creating a variable that contains column names. If you remember, we had to deal here with the idea of automatically managing the IDs of people. So we had to create kind of a metadata table here. And this is just because of the fact that we're not using databases, so we have to do this manually. And one of the reasons why I'm having us do this with the CSV approach is because you'll get a sense of why databases are nice and useful if we ever decide to go back and convert this application to use a database on the back end, which is the plan. And I'll get into reasons why we're doing it this way first, rather than just jumping to the main way. You'll get to appreciate a little bit better why using database systems to store data is so useful. And you'll appreciate it more if you never have to do it the painful way first. Or sorry, if you do have to do it the painful way first. That's what I'm saying. And then you'll have a point of comparison too. But at any rate, that was the point of this. So we have a file here that we were calling database ID tracking. And conceptually, this was keeping track of the maximum ID value currently being used in each one of the files. That's what this file represents. So we should actually probably come through here and change this so that customers actually has a maximum ID value of 2. We have 2 customers already. All right, so we've gone through that's what that represents. So we're opening this file, and then we have an output file here. And then we're going to open the reader and the writer. Do these lines look familiar?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And then for each row in the reader, we're going to grab the table name, which is the first thing in the row here. So this is the table name. This is the value there, what we're calling max ID. So we're going to grab the table name and the max ID. If the table name is customers, we're going to get the ID, increment it by 1. So we're going to convert it to an integer because it's coming into us as a string. We're going to get the ID, increment it by 1, and then set the max ID in the row to be the new ID. So we're going to increment it by 1 in the file as well. And then we're going to write this row here. Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so now we have a variable called new ID that contains 1 greater than the current max ID used in the table, and we've written that new ID back to the file, tracking the ID stuff. So this is like the metadata database stuff. So after that, we're going to create a new customer record with the new ID, the name that has been passed in, the password, and the cache. So it actually looks like this field right here, customer ID, and it looks like we're never using that because we're managing the IDs ourselves here, or not ourselves, within the application. So after we've made the customer data, then we open the customer's CSV file with the append flag here. So there's read, write, and append. And append will just stick information on the end of the file. And so we're going to have a writer for the CSV, and then we're just going to write the row to the file.
Okay.
So
I think there's a typo in that row. Max ID equals new ID. It's supposed to be to string, right? Not to string.
you're correct. Yep. And I guess we'll find out if there are other problems here. So let's comment out that line. Out that line. All right, so let's try to add one. So right now, the customers that we have Bob Jones and Charlie Andrew Smith. If you remember, we had the update function before we were changing his name to give him a middle name.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
now we want to try to add another person using this function that we've made. So to call it, we would have create customer record. And then we have our values here. And oh, I don't know. We'll do Alice. What's a good last name? Alice Carter, for example. And then we'll give her password 3 because we're being very creative. And maybe we'll give her $100. All right. So we're following the order here of our inputs because order does matter when we are giving inputs to functions. Okay, and actually that needs to be a string. And this one is not a string. So now what we would want to have happen is that in this table, we're going to add a row with ID 3. Is what the ID should be, right? 1 more than the maximum ID that we're currently tracking here. In customers tables 2. So we want an ID 3, Alice Carter, password 3, 500. So I don't believe we've run this before. So we are about to see whether or not this works. All right. So integer has no attribute toString. So this is a problem of me being used to C#. So cast integer toString. Okay, so it doesn't have a toString method, it has a string method. In Python, it's a two-string method, or not Python, in C#, it's a two-string method, which is what I write
Okay.
most of the time in my day job. It does the same thing. You have a function that takes in whatever thing you're working with and converts it to a string. That's all it is. So this is really normal when you're switching between languages to just, you know what you want to do. I want to convert an integer to a string. I want to add something to the end of a list data type. I want to, et cetera, right? Like, you know what you want to do, you just don't know how to do it in the specific language that you're working with. But as you see, you're always only a Google away from figuring out how to do the thing. So sometimes people will make a big deal out of switching programming languages. I mean, there are certain differences that are bigger, such as how the programs run. There's a programming language called Java that actually doesn't quite compile the code and also doesn't quite run it interpreted like Python does. There's something called the JVM, the Java Virtual Machine. I won't get into all the specifics, but I mean, there are bigger differences between languages, and sometimes they have libraries that are kind of core, and they do something new and different from other languages. Like C# has a system for interacting with the database called Entity Framework, or Entity Framework Core if you use .NET Core. And it has features and things that a lot of other systems don't. But in any case, syntax-wise, simple stuff like this, you'll get used to just doing that. And that's not what makes switching between programming languages hard. Okay, so we changed the two-string methods to just string methods. And well, we didn't get any errors that time. And so if we come here, wow, I actually kind of wasn't expecting it to work the first time. Because you get used to it once you program for a while. Very frequently, your code does not work the first time. Usually, you may have forgotten something, or you just have to do it a couple times. But I guess we're still not doing things that are crazy hard here. So,
Okay.
all right. So before we go and we do other things, does everything that we've done here make sense? I want to give you a chance if you're lost somewhere, or things like that.
Okay. So far I follow, but I do think I'll have to go through it again to make full sense of it. But I think I get it so far. I don't have any questions right now.
Okay, so just so that we're time efficient, homework that I'll give you at the end of today. So everything that we've done now for the customer, so we have a create, a read, a delete, an update for customers. I want you to do the exact same thing for store runners.
Okay.
And I would also like you to keep rough track of the amount of time it took you. So this is going to be the compromise I think that we make between me sitting here and watching you do it, which, if I'm just sitting around not doing anything, it's not very efficient, right? But I would like to get a sense of where you are. And so, I mean, you don't have to time it exactly, but I just want an estimate, as in, did it take you a couple hours versus the entire day, for example, of doing these 4 functions here, same functions, except working on the store owners rather than customers. So we can make an example store owner. Have we made examples? No, we haven't made examples in all of these. So let's do that. Let me give you at least that. So we said store owners have an ID, a name, a password, and then we said assets and liabilities. So this is in the main function. We had set up customers, store owners, stores, and products, right? So store owners next. So if these are their things, well, then we'll have, remember, IDs are going to start with 1 for us. That's important. It's important that we don't just pick arbitrary ones because we're tracking their value here. Okay, first name, last name again. I'm not very creative. That's not a strong suit. What's a good? What?
Ben Johnson.
Ben Johnson, sure. coming up with some good generic names here. Ben Johnson, our creativity. So assets, we'll say that Mr. Ben Johnson has $5,000 of assets, but he has $3,000 of liabilities. So not a very big business here, because depending on how big you are, you might have hundreds of thousands of dollars here. But so he's doing fine. He's not in the red here. So Ben Johnson, $5,000 of assets, $3,000 of liabilities. I think we got the order right. Order does matter in how we set this up. So we have ID, name, password, assets, liabilities, and then we have ID, name, passwords, assets, liabilities. Okay, so there's our example. And so you'll be able to test your code when you write all of the functions that we've done for customers, for store owners. You'll be able to test it with that record, and then you'll have to create another one, just like we did over here with customers. All right, so that will be something that I'll have you do between today and tomorrow, or whenever we next meet. But what I would like to do now is go ahead and set up the main program loop, because that's something that well, we don't have examples of yet. And if you get that set up, you'll be able to start doing some of the logic here. So we have talked about some of the stuff we'll have to do in the main program loop. So add login functionality. The user needs to provide the name and the password. So from the perspective of store owners, we want to do these things. From the perspective of customers, we want to do these things, and so forth, right? But the very first thing we can do is set up our, oops, that's not what we want to be adding it. Set up our, what I will just call like our main method. So you could call this something different perhaps. So we're going to make a function and call it main. This is going to be our program loop. And then we'll call main in our script file here. All right, so this will be the general structure of our application. We are going to have a function where we write all of the main program loop. So if you remember back to the past example that we did, where we had our command line application, you remember when we were going over validation and this stuff here, where we had like adding and subtracting and dividing stuff on the command line? Yes? No, maybe? All right, well, in this example that we had done with the adding and subtracting and dividing on the command line, we had, our program loop here, right? So what we're going to do actually is, what's in this function right now? We're just going to go ahead and copy this, because general format is going to be similar-ish. Okay, so we are just going to copy what was there. So, well, that's weird. I thought I got that. Whatever. It's faster for me to just type it. So we're going to start out having a variable called user input, and we're going to set it with an initial value of something. Okay. So in this application, we didn't have state. We didn't have the idea of users or anything. But the first thing that we should do here, so let me just go ahead and comment all this out. Same sort of things here. We're going to have a while loop, and then we're going to have within that, we're going to have a print statement for and then we'll have So do you remember this general structure here?
Yeah, I do.
So I'm going to try to have you do the rest of the things here. So what I want us to start with is I want us to implement a function that lets a user log in.
Okay.
So some things to keep in mind is that we have types of users. We have customers and we have store owners. Now, when we're designing something to let people log in, do we want to make them pick what kind of person they are? Do they care? So like, for example, when you log in to, I don't know, what's a good example here? Since I guess none of us maybe use our software systems that work quite like this, but I'll just tell you, you don't necessarily want to make the user pick something like this. They don't care. They don't know what a customer and a store owner is, and that these two people in the data system have different records and things like that. So what we need to get from the user is probably a name and then their password, right?
Yes.
And that's what we want the user to provide to us. And for now, we're just going to use actual name. At some point, perhaps we could give them a username, right? Because I think we decided that you know what, we probably actually should. We probably actually should give them a username. Let's go through and do that real quick, and then you'll see what it looks like. So for now, we'll just keep it simple. We'll give like first dot last, all lowercase, will be the format we do here. But we're actually adding a column here to the files. So Alice Carter. Okay. And then our store owner over here. Okay, now we've added that. Now back in our main file here, we're going to need to update this. So ID name, and now we need to do.
Okay.
There should be single quotes for consistency. Not that it really matters because the interpreter will accept either, but we just added a username column. And that's because we need to uniquely identify the people logging in. All right, so we're going to go ahead and add that to our column list in all of the places where we were using this. Okay, so we had it these places, and then we were here just getting the name and the cache there. So we don't need to change anything there because we're not going to show them their customer name there. For update, we will need to add something here because we probably do want to let them change their username. No, actually, probably not. Now that I think about it, most applications don't let you change your username once you pick one. They let you change your password though. So we actually don't need to update anything here. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because if we wanted to let them change their username, we'd have to add it to, well, actually, you know what? You know what? I lied. We actually still need to add it back. I forgot because we're writing everything regardless.
Okay.
So,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But conceptually, we don't really want to let them change it. But we still need to add the line there. Okay. And then
this reminds me of a question I had. I wondered why Alice Carter's entry in the CSV file had no spaces between the entries.
That's because it got added automatically by the CSV file or by the CSV package. And when we do it by hand, typically just because we're used to seeing it visually, we add the spaces. They're not actually necessary in the CSV file. Because the thing that it's called a delimiter, a string delimiter, something that goes in between items that you're tracking. And so in a CSV file, the delimiter is a comma, hence comma separated value file. And so the thing that separates things is commas, not commas and spaces, for example. You don't actually need the space for the computer to be able to parse it properly. It's just typically when we make them by hand, we add the space just because we're used to it. That one there, like why that one specifically was because Alice, if you remember, got added by our program directly down here, right?
Yeah.
And it's because the program added it that it didn't bother adding the spaces because it doesn't need to. All right, so now we've added username to our functions here. Okay, so username should be what we use to log in.
Okay.
So we're going to go through and pseudocode some stuff first, and then I'm going to try to have you do it. Okay, so in login, they're going to give us a username and a password. And what are we going to want to do based on what they give us?
We would want to check the username against the CSV file to see if they match any of the usernames there.
Is it which CSV file specifically?
The store owners, both store owners and customers.
So we're going to have two files, store and customer. Good catch, because we can't just do it with one because the user could be either one of these types here.
Yeah.
Okay, so what do we do? Let's do both cases. So if there is a match, what do we do? And if there is not a match, what do we do? So if there's not a match is easier.
Yeah, we could ask them to create a profile, create an account of their own.
Ask them to. Okay, good.
And if there's a match, we will require a password. Ask for a password.
So typically, do applications make users do it in 2 steps or?
Oh, no. No, I was thinking yeah, that makes sense. So, so they'll provide both username and password as a match, then
this is a match in username. Yeah. So if there's a match in username, that means that there's a user with that username, but is that good enough? Is that good enough for us to let them into the site?
No, they have to provide a password. That's actually why I was saying maybe we'll check the username and the password as one. Like they have to both things have to match information. Yeah.
So we could check them, like kind of use the AND operator and check both conditionals at the same time. But do we actually even care about the password if the username doesn't exist?
No, we don't.
So this case down here, we don't even care about password at all, because if the user doesn't exist, well, then we can't even check a password, right?
Yes, yes.
So what I'm saying is that you actually have to, conceptually, you have to check username first.
Okay.
Because that is how we're identifying the users to themselves, at least. In the database, we're identifying by IDs, but to the users, that's their unique string, right? Usernames have to be unique across users. So if there's a match in username, what do we do then?
Then we ask for a password and check it against the files to see if there's a match.
So didn't we say that we didn't necessarily want to ask again for a password if they give it to us all up front?
Okay. So if they give both up front, there's a match, then we pull up their information, right?
Okay, this isn't a trick question. All I'm saying is first we check the username, because if there's not a match in username, we do this, right? So we don't even check the password until we've gotten to the username. So if there's a match in username, then we check if there is if the
Okay,
record
okay.
for that username has the password matching what they've input, right?
Yes.
So this is one case. However, there could also be the case that passwords don't, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You see? This is
Yes.
why I was asking in the way I was, okay? So,
Okay, okay.
so if the record for that username has the password matching what they've inputted, then what?
We pull up their accounts.
We pull up their account, and for now, we'll just say
Okay, okay.
and okay, and what happens if the passwords don't match?
We ask them to try again, input the password again.
To try again. Now, think back to many accounts. Since we're doing a command line, we'll have to think about what the best user experience here is. If they fail a login attempt, do you think that we want to reset the username as well, or just make them enter the password again?
Reset. Did you say reset?
Well, so here's the thing. If, like, let's say Bob Jones tries to log in, right? And so
Yes.
he'll say Bob.Jones is his username, password. Let's say he gets the wrong password, password 5, but his password is password 1. And so should we make him type out Bob.Jones again? Or should we, if he fails it, should we have it, oh, okay, Bob Jones is still trying to log in. Right?
No,
you see what I'm asking?
we shouldn't make him put in the username again.
Okay, so
do this.
Don't make them put in username again. But what happens if they had a typo in their username?
If there's a typo,
like what happens? What happens if they need to actually enter a different username?
Okay. I thought it would be the same thing. Is there a way? Wouldn't it be just the same as creating and asking them to create a new account or to enter username again?
So we actually probably shouldn't just straight up ask them to say a new account. We'll say the username provided is not valid, right? Because it could just be that they had a typo, right? Maybe they don't actually want to make a new account. Maybe they just had a typo. So the username provided is not valid.
You
either
try again.
Yeah, like basically like check the information you entered, or that's when we would ask them if they want to make a new account.
Okay.
Or right, something like that. Okay.
Yes.
But that still leaves us with the question of what happens if they have a username to enter, the username is valid, but they enter a password, but the password that they give does not match the password in the data store. So you said better UX to not make them put in the username again. I agree. But nonetheless, we have to have a way for them to exit all the way out if they decide they want to change the username, right? Otherwise, they get stuck. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. I see.
Okay, so we should say, but if the user wants to like go back different username, that needs Does that make sense?
Yes.
So that'll be more complicated to set up, but it'll be necessary for user experience. So let's look at this at a high level. So this is us pseudocoding it, right? So we have two types of users, customers and store owners. Those are the users of our application. So to log in, we check the username against the CSV files to see if there's a match. If there is a match in username, then we check if the record for that username has a password matching what they've inputted. And if the password does match, that means they've given us a valid account information. We pull up their account, means we call the read function and display their info. And if the passwords don't match, we ask them to try again. Input, like, so input, try again means input password again. And we don't make them put in the username again, right? So, however, if they decide that they want to actually go back and enter a different username, we need to support that as well. Somehow, I'm going to leave that kind of vague here for the moment, but, and then if there's not a match in the username, that means that the username they provided isn't valid. We give them a message saying something like, the username provided is not valid. Either check the information you entered or create an account if you do not have one. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so logically, we need to give them an option to create an account too, right?
Yes.
Okay, so here, we're going to need to give people, in a real application, you wouldn't probably let just anyone become a store owner, right? Like maybe they have to provide some documentation or whatever, but for now, we're just going to let them pick whether they're a user or a store owner, right?
Yes.
You know what? Actually, for the moment, let's just make the create function for customers, because to properly let someone become, or you know what? I take that back. Store owners are going to have to also create stores, right?
Yeah.
Like that'll be something that we let a store owner do, is open a store. But all right, so create account. Okay, so if they say they want to create an account, the first thing that we would want to do is what? So if we have different kinds of users, aren't we going to want to figure out which kind we're creating?
Yes, we will.
Okay, so we're going to want to ask what kind of user they are registering. Customer. Okay, so then we'll have if customer, we're going to do stuff, and if it's storeroom, we're going to do stuff, right? Okay, so if it's a customer, what info are we going to need?
I think everything in the CSV files for customers. So we'll need their name, we'd need we would need their username, we would need a password, we would need the wallets, what you want to.
So everything except for ID, right?
Yes.
Because ID, we're going to be tracking automatically. So we decided name, username, password, like, right? And store owners, again, in the real world, you wouldn't just let someone say, oh, I have this much money. Okay, great. You can use that amount of money. Now, of course, like you would actually make them deposit money and stuff like that. But you know what? Actually, if you want to make it more closely model reality, we could also not have them give cash, and then we could write a deposit function for users, right?
Okay.
Let's do that. Let's try to actually make things realistic. So if it's a store owner, so we're still going to have name, username, password. And And then here we'd want to, after we've asked for their appropriate info, we ask if they want to deposit cash. Right? That's a natural thing to ask. They've created an account. To be able to buy anything, they need to add money to their account, right?
Yes.
For store owners, we want to ask if they are ready to fill out balance sheet assets and liabilities.
Yeah.
And if they do that, if they are ready. Right. So we're trying to be convenient to let them do things automatically once they're registering, right? You see, this is already
Yes.
getting kind of complicated, right?
Yeah.
All right. Well, I probably can't stay on too much longer, but you see how we're pseudocoding things out?
Yeah, that's what I just wanted to ask, if this is what you mean by pseudocoding.
So kind of.
Right
do you remember when I kind of spent almost a whole day talking about it before? You know how I was talking about how there's like different kind of approaches to coding? There's the people who like
Yes.
plan out absolutely everything up front, and then there's the people who just kind of write it in code the first time. I really am more like the latter, but this is as close as I get to pseudocoding, basically.
Okay.
Like, because it is kind of necessary, right? You want to make sure that you're not forgetting stuff.
Yeah.
And, you know, but we're not, you know, it wouldn't shock me if in this process that we're going through, if we forgot a line or something that we needed to check or whatever, because we're just kind of going through it fast, right? But
yeah,
honestly, if I'm being honest with you, one of the reasons why I'm doing this right now is because we're doing this with you. Like if this was just me, I just write it. You know, like rather than doing the pseudocode here, I would just like straight up when I have a line here saying ask what kind of user they are, I would just use the input line directly, you know, from like, well, I guess I deleted it, but you know, like here, let me actually go pull that example. I thought I had it there, but I must have like deleted the example. Yeah.
that's it, I think.
What'd you say?
I said that was it, I think.
Yeah. I have it. I mean, it's just, so there was the previous example. So I would have just gone and done the, you know, gotten the user input directly, right?
Yeah.
User input equals input and just done it here. And then had the if user input equals customer, do that. Like I would have just written it. But we're trying to kind of give you a chance to practice. So that's why we're doing it this way.
I understand.
All right. So assignment for today, I would say, maybe asking you to get the full login is a little bit optimistic, but if you can get there, that's great, right? Because I think we have enough information there for you to do it. So what you should do is do all 4 of the operations here. So read, update, delete, and create. Do all 4 operations for store owners as well. So we've done them all for customers. Do them all for store owners, and then see if you can get the login done here. Oh, so I did have it. I had just asked. It just got moved down. That's fine. Yeah.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. Yeah.
And
I should do that today and have it ready for tomorrow.
Yeah, that'll be the goal. I mean, it won't be probably quite as easy as you think, right? Because to just right now, we're just waving our hand and we're saying, okay, go ahead and check the username against the CSV file. Well, that sounds easy, but remember to actually check something against the CSV file, you're going to have to open the file as a read with the CSV reader and then go through the rows and check if a row has the information that we want. You know what I'm talking about? You know, so that is going to be roughly what's involved in checking if a username exists, right?
Okay.
Now, I will be honest, this is kind of growing a little bit bigger than I thought it might. So tell me if you get super intimidated by the scope here. I think it's good because it's going to give you.
Not yet. I'm actually pretty happy.
Not
yet, but I'm actually, yeah.
Yeah.
I think like I'm getting a feel for real coding.
Right, because I'm trying to make it not fake, right? I mean, in the real world, just because most normal people don't like command lines and stuff, a storefront like this would not actually use a command line. It would use like a graphical user interface. But like the stuff that you can do, as in like logging in and having an account and a balance and buying things, all of that is actually exactly how a real store would work, right? So the logic of what we're doing is not fake at all. The interaction of it, eventually we could come back and turn this into a web app perhaps, and then actually add a graphical user interface for it. But we're not actually making something that is like useless or contrived or anything. It's pretty simplified compared to how most real world like retail systems work, but they're actually not that different from this, right? I mean, everything on top of it is just, complexity, but the the underlying principles are basically what we're doing. And of course, they all use databases, which we'll get to eventually, rather than CSV files. But
Okay.
All right. Well, I think that's where we'll cut for today. So I think you have things that you can be trying here. So just for example, and hint. So we're gonna tell the user their options. So for now, you can start with just, I would say, login perhaps, right?
Yes.
All right. So for now, you don't even have to do register. We'll just have it there. So plenty to do. And I would suggest as you go through and you try to add your, your read, your update, your delete, your create, I would go through and test the functions as you write them to make sure that they work properly on the store owner's file here. Any questions before I hop off here?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Well, I think plenty to try for you here. And I guess we'll meet again next time and we'll see how far you got. So that's where we'll cut for today.